Welcome back to Building Elite Sales Teams. If you've been learning from the great sales leaders we have on Building Elite Sales Teams, please remember to rate us in your podcast app. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel and find all of our new episodes there. The link is in the show notes. A critical piece to building an elite team is understanding your product's differentiators and what pockets of customers are the right customers for your differentiators. As a founder, I understand the temptation to believe that everyone needs your product, but thinking of the market that way is not the path to an efficient and high-performing team. Being honest as an organization about who your product is not for is essential as a leader and as a team. On today's episode of Building Elite Sales Teams, we will discuss this with Pete Scharber, who's learned this lesson firsthand. Over the past 27 years, Pete has developed businesses and led teams in the medical manufacturing sector. During his career, he's worked for many of the largest and fastest growing companies in the medical contract manufacturing industry. The first half of his career was spent as a high-performing individual contributor. As an executive leader over the past 10 years, he's built several top-performing sales teams and created marketing strategies and go-to-market plans focused on the pharma, diagnostic, and medical technology sectors. Pete enjoys wilderness canoeing, backpacking, and hammock camping in his free time. Pete, welcome to Building Elite Sales Teams, and thank you for joining us today.
Lucas, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this for a while, so happy to be here.
Yeah, Pete, can you help our audience get to know you a little bit better? Give us some more details about your career in sales and sales leadership, how you got started, and then how you made the transition from individual contributor to sales management.
Yeah, so pretty typical, right? I was never planning to go into sales. That wasn't my aspiration through high school or even college. Took the engineering track through college. And then my very first job out of college was for a company called Phillips Plastics at the time. Currently, it's called Phillips Medisize. They're one of the largest medical contract manufacturers in my space. I got hired as a project engineer, and part of that training program, they put me through right out of college, 18-month training program. Nothing better, I think, for a new college, green college kid to get some experience. And the last month of my training project or training program was to shadow the local sales guy. His name is Jake Hirahara. He's a legend in my industry and still one of my really good friends today. And Jay took me under his wing for a month, and I never had so much fun in my life. Like, I can travel, I can meet customers, I get paid for this. I love that challenge. And then, as luck would have it, I concluded that training program, and Jay was part of a rep group at the time. So an outside independent rep. And they were looking to expand the team at that point in time. And so again, 18 months into my career, I resigned from Phillips Medisize, became a rep for them, 100% commission, 24-year-old kid, with no guaranteed paycheck. And that was no better way to get a real quick taste of what sales is and what it takes to be successful. So that really started me off on my career in sales, business development. Did that for about 6 years. And then after that, joined probably the largest medical contract manufacturer in the industry. It was Jabil. It's currently Jabil. It was Nipro Healthcare at the time, and spent about 10 years there and just had a great level of success. It's when they were on a really rapid, I call it magic carpet ride in terms of their growth in the industry. So got to see firsthand what makes, a medium-sized company at that time really accelerate into, quickly becoming one of the largest contract manufacturers in my industry. So that was a great learning experience.
I want to hear about your transition into management, but before I do, one thing I'd like to double click on a little bit is to tell, one of the things one of the stories that I always like to hear from successful sellers and successful leaders is if there was something specific in your background that gave you the drive to be successful, because a lot of people, can be successful in other walks of life, but not in sales. And the people that are successful in sales usually have drive, and there's usually something in their background that kind of gave them the determination to be able to do it. Curious, if there's anything you'd point to specifically in your background.
Yeah, interesting question. I'm a very passionate individual. I catch myself speaking fast sometimes and just getting really, into it. And I think that's been part of my success, is just really being passionate, honest, integrity. But when I think back, I think, Lucas, it's my father. I think my father was a true blue collar worker his whole life. He was in the commercial nursery, so growing plants and trees and shrubs, things of that nature. Hardest working person I've met in my life, but he was there for every single sporting event, every single family event. I remember I wrestled in high school, and I got one vivid memory of my dad said, I'm going to try to be there. It's going to be close. It was early. And I'm literally taking the mat. I look, my dad's in the corner. I'm getting emotional because he was full of mud, right? He was in the mud. He was in the corner, and, he made my match. And, he gave us, my mom stayed home. So she was a full-time stay-at-home parent. My dad never made much money, but I never knew it growing up. And I think just seeing him work so hard and providing us with just great upbringing just instilled in me, I think, just that drive to work hard. I've worked since I was 11, had a paper out at 11, was up 6 o'clock in the morning before school delivering papers. Back then they had an afternoon delivery, so it was twice a day. After school, I'd go do the afternoon route. So I just grew up watching somebody work really hard, instilled that work ethic in myself.
Appreciate you sharing that. I've never done any competitive wrestling at all, but I would imagine I've always thought that's an area that requires that same level of kind of determination and drive and hard work to succeed, to be a competitive wrestler as well. So it seems like that's something that you had very early in life. You were gaining that from your father from the very beginning. And even, as a teenager, you probably, that work ethic had rubbed off on you.
Yeah, I think so. I'm a very competitive person, which I think is important DNA in most successful salespeople as well. And now I got teenage kids that can hit the golf ball farther than me and are faster than me and all that. But I tell you what, it's fun to now compete with my sons and oftentimes lose, but the fire still burns strong. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's great. Tell us about your transition into sales management.
Yeah, sure. So that was, I guess, roughly the first half of my career. I think was very fortunate to have a great mentor early and then to land with a company that just really took off and seeing what made that work. So took a lot of those learnings, I believe, into the second half of my career where I began to lead teams, right? Player coach, but mostly coach. Got introduced to the strategy side, which I've really enjoyed. I think I've gotten very good at that. That's probably the one thing that I enjoy most currently and I think the main topic for the podcast today, right, is just devising a go-to-market strategy around the true strengths of your organization. I think it's not to get into the topic, but I've got a lot of, thoughts and ideas around, it's really about just being honest with the organization and where you can differentiate and excel against your competition. So got into the leadership side and, through that first, call it 15 years of my career, made a lot of connections, a lot of network. There's a Facebook group today that's just around the ex-Nipro employees. I mean, it's just a big group of people that stay together. So I was able to effectively build and recruit teams largely from my past network. And certainly while my industry is pretty large, it's also small at the same time, right? You're in the industry. If you survive 10 or 15 years, you got a reputation and you're known, right? You can make 2 or 3 phone calls and really get to know just about anybody in the industry. So built some teams from scratch. I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed devising and optimizing the strategies, coupling that with appropriate compensation plans that focus on the objectives of the organization. I'm just shocked when I join, a couple companies in my career and look at the comp plan and it's completely disconnected from the growth trajectory and focus of the organization. So I think that's a big component as well. And new challenge for me has been good on how can I take what I've learned, my failures, my successes, industry knowledge, and help others optimize their sales performance and help organizations optimize their performance. And new challenge, fun one, just kind of getting joy and satisfaction through seeing others that you help, right, and mentor.
Tell me a little bit about, there's this issue where that I previewed in the open there about, really being honest about what your differentiators are and what pockets to sell to, given those differentiators. How did you learn that was the importance of that?
Yeah. So my industry may be a little bit different from a lot of the other podcasts folks you've had on. A very competitive industry it's really selling services, right? So we're not selling a product. We're not selling software. What we're selling, at least most of my career, again, medical devices, right? Or medical component. Almost always in my career, it's been through plastic injection molding. So usually design services, plastic injection molding, assembling molded components together, coupled with purchase components, putting it together up to like a finished medical device. A lot of stuff on TV for the GLP-1 drugs and auto injectors and things of that nature. So that's my industry, right? It's most of the major medical OEMs that we see and that we invest in the stock market. Those are typically my customers. They own the design. They own the product. They will come to me and, the company that I'm representing, sometimes with a finished design. So they just want you to manufacture to their specifications and their design. Oftentimes they've got a concept. They know what it needs to do. They've got an engine or internal components that they know that they need for this to function. And then, I can help them, or my team can help them with the design, optimizing their design for manufacturability as an example. So we're selling service, right? Through manufacturing processes. Highly competitive. There's a lot of really great companies in the industry. So how do we compete, right? So that's, again, what the world I've lived in for a long time is everybody can mold plastic. Most everybody's really good at it. Some people can build the molds. Some can't. Some can help with the design. Some can't. But what's happened over the last really 15 years, a lot of a consolidation. So a lot of acquisitions, a lot of private equity money coming into the industry. So left is a lot of mid-sized to large medical contract manufacturers that can do it all. You go to the website, it says the same thing. So it's this web of really 30, 40, 50 companies that could all do a really good job and provide a product to a customer. So how are we different? Right? I mean, that's how do we, when we get in front of a customer and they've got 6 or 8 quotes in their hand, how do we differentiate ourselves? Right? And you got one shot. You'll spend 3 to 5 years getting to your first quote, winning your first product with a top prospect. And if you don't deliver, sayonara, right? For the next 15 years or until there's a new purchasing manager that comes into play. So you ultimately have to deliver on your product, right? And your program. So you probably want to dig deeper, but it starts with, I think, just looking in the mirror and typically challenging leadership. What are we honestly really at? What are we on the top side of our market? Where do we excel against our competitors and where are we weak, right? So from there, you can get an honest take on where you sit in that landscape. You can then do gap analysis. You can say, do we need to invest in technologies? Do we need to make an acquisition? Should we divest and focus? So that's where it has to start, is that honest, where are we and where do we want to be?
I'm curious. I would imagine a few different ways that you could have learned this lesson. One would be, doing a lot of work, putting in proposals that you really didn't have any chance to win, that you didn't realize that you have any chance to win. Another would be like, hey, you had a mentor who kind of taught you, do it this way. Let's not put in proposals on stuff where we're not differentiated. Are either of those directionally correct, or is it some other way that you learned like that you have to do this?
Yeah. I think, it's the industry, the medical device industry is vast and large. We talked about 3 end markets: pharma, drug delivery, diagnostics, but within there is hundreds of sub-segments of the marketplace, right? Do you want to do orthopedic stuff? Do you want to do cardiology stuff? Do you want to do neuro? Do you want to do drug? So often you need to really focus on an end market, right? That matches with, at least the world I live in, that matches with the core competencies and strengths of your organization. Once I've gone into leadership, I think every single company that I've worked with in a leadership role, I've instituted a process where we look at incoming opportunities before we get them into the hands of the people that are quoting. And we do a review with a small group of decision makers to make sure it's aligned with the strategic growth initiative, right? Is it in a marketplace and subsegment that we're focused on? Does it match our core competencies that we do really well? Right? Are the volumes where we need them to be? Is it the part geometry? Is it the size? Does it match the equipment we have? And does it, is it a strategic long-term running program, right? So in my world, you win a program, you typically are going to run it for 7 to 15 years, right?
Mhm.
So that's kind of the annuity that pays off when you win a program. And so we do a quick review of all those to make sure that all those boxes are checked. And then at that point, if it passes, right, you get the green light, then we're going to go to quotation, because when I was stepping in and I'm looking at all the quote activity, the pipeline is huge, and all this quote activity. And one organization, Lucas, that I joined, think it was the first week. So it was a piece of business that was won before I joined the organization. And we're in a kickoff meeting with operations. And the operations manager says, "We don't want this piece of business. What are we doing with this piece of business?" And I'm like, okay, there's opportunity, right? So let's get a little bit more effective and efficient on what we're quoting and more selective.
I would imagine it could be challenging at times. You have a sales rep who brings in a piece, an opportunity to quote a piece of business. It goes through the checklist and it doesn't pass. How is it to sort of, deal with that on the sales rep side and say, quote this this opportunity that you brought in?
And one of the secrets is I'll train my team or tell them or encourage them, call me first before this meeting, right? Let's have a 5-minute or let's get an initial gut check on this, and then we can determine, right? So there is kind of that's one of the little trade secrets, right, that I've found effective. But so yeah, it does happen. It's early on, right, when you're making that transformation in the organization. But here's what I'll tell you: within 3 to 4 months, the percentage that don't pass, it dramatically falls off because the team will quickly learn, right, what's a good piece of business for the organization and what isn't. And there's nothing worse than spending 6 months of effort, right, to get a quote, especially with a new prospective customer, only to have all that effort go for naught because you're not even going to get an opportunity to quote it. So some of those early rejections can be absolutely learning experiences, right? And like I say, you spend that effort and you don't get the return. You quickly modify, your behavior, and that individual salesperson really quickly will change their focus on what they're, how they're spending their time.
They're getting clarity pretty quickly. It sounds like we're on the types of business that they're bringing in. What are some of the things that you do to help that clarity come quickly so that they stop bringing in the wrong types of opportunities?
Yeah. So I don't set my team up for failure, right? So there's
Yeah.
training, there's a lot of conversations that go on. It's, again, it's usually pretty early in terms of when I will join an organization before, some of these changes would take effect. And it's never a surprise, right? It's lots of communication and training with my team. Here's where we're going. I want them to have direct feedback, right? And it's part of that assessment of where do we compete, right? What is the sweet spot? That's not a decision I'm making in a vacuum, right? This is a collective conversation with a lot of individuals. So it's all about communication. It's about training. It's about getting buy-in, right? Because the last thing you want is somebody that's, on the sales team out prospecting and they're disconnected with the focus or, disagrees with, the alignment or disaligned with where we're going. And, for this, right? I don't, this is different. I don't believe in, right? There's nothing worse than a salesperson that doesn't believe in what they're selling. That's a pretty quick, flag that any customer is going to pick up on. So it's just honest communication and feedback and a collective effort.
I know that the answers that you're giving us are the right answers. I've been in some of these executive meetings before that you're talking about where it's like, hey, this new channel for us, it could take focus away, but it could also be the biggest thing that our business does. It could be gigantic, but it's also going to take focus away. And, and I think that those decisions, like, it's really easy to say, hey, we're going to stay focused on our differentiators. We're not going to, go chase waterfalls or whatever. But the reality is that in those meetings, it can be really hard to say no to, chasing opportunities that could be gigantic. What are some of the things that you think about to evaluate? Is this a big opportunity in our wheelhouse versus, it's not what we said our strategic direction is, but it could be bigger than it could expand our strategic direction. How do you maintain discipline on those types of things?
We're always all whale hunting, right? There's nothing better than that big victory. You certainly get the whale in your pool that you're fishing. That's the home run, right? The holy grail of what we're all chasing. And, in my industry, the program sizes they're typically very large programs, right?
Yeah.
So we look at them on an annual production revenue basis. As I mentioned, they run for years. And the smallest opportunities tend to be about $500,000 to $1 million a year of annual revenue, all the way up to the home run is the $50 million, annual revenue type program. So you got to have the mix, right? So in my industry, there's some companies that are really good at the lower volume to mid volume. which tend to be the smaller program size too, right? And you get typically a little bit higher markup, right? You get more profitability, but you've got the smaller programs. The big whales, huge revenue, but typically much more competitive and a little bit less on the profitability side, right? So I really believe in staying focused on your end market, right? Or your specific pockets that you're focused on that you know you're really good at and you're very competitive at. And then it's within those finding the program size and scale, right? And longevity that trying to optimize, right? Tap into the high end side of those type of opportunities. So one organization or one role that I had, Lucas, you talk about those difficult conversations, right? So I'm sitting with the executive leadership, the board of directors. Here comes the new sales leader, right? And he's got this wild idea. He's telling me, I said, listen, guys, the pipeline is going to be cut in half, right? And he used to gasp like, well, no, it can't happen, right?
Yeah.
I said, but our hit rate, we're not going to quote nearly as much stuff as we shouldn't be quoting, right? So in my mind, half the pipeline that you see today is fictional anyways, right? It's pipe dream. Right. So I said, it's going to be cut in half. I said, give me 6 months. That's what I'm asking for is 6 months. And if we're sitting here in 6 months and it's not working or we don't see the path and the trajectory to where we want to go, then let's have that really difficult conversation. And maybe I'm not the right person to lead the charge. Right. So literally overnight cleaned up the CRM, right? We stripped it out. We instituted some of these processes. And then 6 months, certainly within 12 months, the pipeline got even larger than where it was at that original stage. And it was comprised of much more real, tangible pipeline that was aligned with, the organization's expectations and goals. So I think you got to believe it and you got to commit to it. And yeah, there's always that pull outside of, the core focus, that big program out there that's maybe an orthopedic or some other, end market that you're not focused on. And occasionally you might take a flyer, right? We're going to take a couple flyers just because the potential return is so big. But I honestly I can't recall when we take that big flyer outside where it led to success. So yeah. I think you just got to commit to it. If it's not work, you need to change the plan. Right? You need to change the strategy and evolve it.
So I'm sure we're going to have sales leaders listening to this who are thinking, what Pete's saying is very applicable to my situation. And I need to get my team more focused on our highest propensity deals, our deals that close the fastest, our deals that have, the highest annual contract value. And so, I want to take these steps and do some, cut the garbage out of our pipeline and get my team more focused. What are the things that these sales leaders should be watching out for? What are the mistakes that they could make when they go through this process that you've been talking about in terms of getting their team more focused on the highest propensity deals?
Yeah, there's certainly pitfalls, right? And I think, us sales leaders, we're always kind of held to the pipeline health and certainly the closed business. So don't ever cook the books. I say, pipeline's the easiest thing to fake, bar none. You can load the pipeline up with whatever and make it sound real and glorious and everything, but you're not going to win it. Right. So in the end, it's garbage. So just be honest. Right. And again, I keep coming back to that. Be true. Right. Because I think if you start to take shortcuts or feel like you're taking steps, again, outside of that true honest depiction of where you're trying to bring the organization, you're going to get burned every time. I've learned if you can pull a team together, right? Honestly, everybody's an individual contributor, everybody's competitive. There's competition within the sales team, which I think is healthy. I got no problem board meetings and sales meetings. I'll put the individual pipelines up of everybody. I mean, let's just see where we're at. Let's root for each other, right? And if individuals not performing, they know it. And that's not to call them out, but sales is black and white. And that's part of why I love it, right? It's just, you're either closing business or you're not, right? And that's what I love about it. One of the things I love about it, communication. So one of the things that I've had good success with, Lucas, is trying to do things to pull my team together. I'll do weekly or every other biweekly. I call them sales huddles, just me and the team, nobody else, no other executives, nobody else. And it's like, we'll have a meeting. It's almost always Monday morning, not first thing, but earlier in the day. And it's like, hey, who's got a story from the weekend? Right. And it's usually something funny, or I told a story. I was doing some landscaping and my wife's cutting and trimming the old dead stuff from spring. Right. And I'm like, this is tedious. This is a faster way. I thought let's light it on fire and burn it off. And I started a very large fire in my backyard with trees and everything. Anyway, not to get off, but I mean, there was an example of I was embarrassed, and it was this great story. Like, this happens, right? And I'm not very patient. And that was a perfect example of, I knew it wasn't the right choice, but yeah, I learned the hard way. But anyway, it's stories like that. And you start to connect, I think, just on a personal level. And then what I start seeing almost always after a couple months is people starting to raise hands to help somebody else on the team. Yeah, I know so-and-so. I've done this before. Here's where I went wrong. And we'll talk about work, but I'd really try to keep it. The topics, I'll come with a few things to talk about, some updates, things like that. But it's almost always, somebody was on vacation or somebody had a graduation or one of their kids was doing something. It's just keeping it personal like that. And I think just the chemistry of a team, the best teams I've seen in my career have been teams that truly cared, believed, and would support each other. And it sounds kind of cheesy and soft, but I've seen when that dynamic comes together, to me, I've seen the highest performance come from teams that are just united like that.
One of the things I heard through your stories is to avoid the pitfalls is like, communicate that ahead of time. Like, let your board know, let the rest of your executive team know, this is what's going to happen. Like, don't just jump in and start doing it without having predicted the future for them around like, hey, we're going to take this step and the end result of this is going to be much better for us. But in the meantime, there are some metrics that are going to look worse. And so I think that's a piece of wisdom you shared with us. I think that's very important for avoiding that pitfall that I wanted to reiterate. But yeah, coming back to this idea of like kind of building that team atmosphere, like you and I know that like there's always, when you're building a high performing team, there's always challenges. Whether it's a high performing team or a struggling team, there's always challenges. It's not like it just becomes easy. But on that high performing team, there's also like a feeling of camaraderie and belief that you're talking about. And so when you're going into an organization and maybe they haven't had that, maybe that's part of why you're being brought in, is because they didn't have that feeling of camaraderie and belief. You've talked a little bit about how you start your Monday morning meetings, or I don't know if I think you said Monday morning meetings. What are some of the other things that, maybe a team that's a little bit beaten down and you need to help, kind of bring that belief and camaraderie? What are some of the other things that you do to help? And, I guess another thing I'd love to hear you talk about is like, how did you find out the importance of that? Where did you discover it?
Yeah, a couple of things there. I think maybe to start, to me, it's just keeping it real always, right? I believe in absolute honesty with my team. I live that, my life in general. Even if it's bad news, it's something they don't want to hear, if it's, criticism, whatever. I'm 100% honest. And I think I appreciate when people communicate to me that way. And that's how I communicate, with people in general, whether it's through work or just in life. So a team that maybe culturally isn't there or is struggling, or there's individuals on a team that maybe aren't fully aligned with that kind of culture that we're trying to get. It's just, again, honest, like, maybe they lost a big deal. I've seen that many times. I've had it happen to me. I mean, that you work on something for a year, it's a big whale, it's in the bullseye, and they tell you you took second place. I mean, that's just like a dagger, right? And I see people go into depression for months. I mean, honestly, like, devastating, right?
Yeah.
So I just sit down and it's one-on-one, like, been there, done it. I mean, I know how you feel. Does it make sense to do a postmortem, right? Is there anything else we could have done? We did all the right things. We just lost out for whatever reason. So how do we do everything in our power and ability next time around, right, that we're in first place, or can we correct? So anyway, it's just, to me, it's about being just real, that open, honest communication with an individual. And I've found too, that if there's, a couple people that maybe aren't performing or just don't believe in what we're doing, they tend to typically move on themselves, right? I think one of the challenging things of being a sales leader is making changes on a team, improving the team or finding that right chemistry. I'm a firm believer in that team chemistry. And if an individual or individuals just, can't or don't align with that, it's just, you got to have those conversations and sometimes make tough decisions. And again, I think that's part of the sales, just that's the profession we're in, right? It's a performance profession. It absolutely is. And it's never usually a surprise. It's difficult. And that's the part of my job that keeps me awake at night, many nights. My wife will attest to that. And it's, I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people the last 10 years and hired many. I hire for passion. I do. I love a person that comes in, hair on fire, just really driven, very passionate, does their homework, asks the right questions. I'll hire that person every time over the 25 industry vet with the thick Rolodex and impressive resume of success, but just is rigid, right? On how they operate. I just love and have seen great things come out of hardworking, passionate people that, are very open to a true team culture and just are focused on the team as a whole and the organization as a whole, right? How do we win together? I know we've talked a lot about that, but when I think about the best teams I've been a part of, the best teams I've built, the common denominator, or one of them, is typically just that, again, that magic carpet ride where everybody's all in, everybody believes it. It's aligned with where the company's going. The comp plan's aligned with that and rewards the right wins from the team. And then you start seeing people root for each other. Like one of the other things I'll do, Lucas, is sometimes we'll have, if we win a big piece of business, some of those Monday morning meetings, we'll have a Friday afternoon celebratory, we call it dance party, right? We get the disco lights out and there might be a few cocktails that show up through some of the Zoom. I mean, we have fun and we usually do something to maybe try to embarrass or have a little fun with, but purpose is to congratulate and acknowledge the big win. Because they're not that common. And when they do, let's pause, let's smell the roses and let's celebrate. I mean, and then it's usually, what was the path to success here? What was, share, some of the experience on what made you successful in winning this? Because everybody's interested. Salespeople want to hear that, right? So anyway, I think it's just doing things outside of the norm and the corporate grind and doing, I think, fun, sometimes surprising things that make it a fun environment for people to succeed and work with.
Yeah, that's great. Thinking about the things that we've hit on so far today and, anything else that comes to mind, can you just give us a summary of like your key points on building an elite sales team?
Yeah. I mean, you need the right team dynamic. You need that passion. You need the driven individual, unselfish people. I mean, and I think, again, I've interviewed hundreds of people like you probably have. I usually feel like I got a pretty good spidey sense in 5 minutes, right? Just culturally, if this person is the right kind of person I'm looking for. I can't emphasize enough the right comp plan. I see organizations, I've been in organizations where I came in, if you have a comp plan that's capped, I just don't understand that to me. I mean, why would you cap somebody if they're bringing in and the organization is winning business they want? Why in the world would, I've seen top people, 4 months into the year and they're capped. What incentive do they have for the next 8 months to keep cranking? So that's something I've seen that still kind of blows me away. I see business development roles where there's no tie to individual performance on what they sell. It's all on company financial performance. And I don't understand that either, at least in my industry. It just doesn't seem to align or attract top sales talent. Got to have fun. Got to communicate openly, even the tough conversations, just 100% truth and integrity all the time. It's one of the mantras I have on my desk, is trying to live by that, every single day. And, I got a lot of great advice from my early mentor when I started. But one of the things that I think about often is he told me, Pete, you can't think about the money. You can't think about the commission. I mean, I'm money motivated myself. I like that. But if you are focused on the money side, he says it's going to taint you. He said, you do the right things, you win the right business. That's a natural byproduct that will come. Right. So I thought that was very wise. Scratched my head as a 23-year-old saying, I want to make a lot of money. Right. But so, I mean, that's it. And how we started, Lucas, right? You got to have a very strong go-to-market strategy comprised of the right prospective customers that are aligned with your growth strategy. You have to have that. And you got to have an honest look, right, at where you compete. Because if you think you're better than you are, or you're not being honest, you're going to, I think, go off on a side road and maybe compete and get in front of some of these big whale programs, but you're going to lose the vast majority because there's people that are better, lower cost, better footprint, across the globe, what have you. And you're just going to continue to spin your wheels. And I think waste energy, trying to chase business that you really don't have the right to win, or you just can't be very competitive with. So it's that gut check time, that honest assessment. I think it's so important. Right.
Yeah.
And I think, again, that's something that I think is just imperative, is to have that honest.
that really ties into, I think, my takeaways from our conversation here today. I think honesty and transparency are things that came up throughout. We talked about it, kind of, getting your leadership team, your executive team on board with being honest about what our differentiators are and who we should have as customers, being honest with your potential customers about what your differentiators are, what you can bring to the table and what you can't bring to the table and that might be better suited with someone else. And then being honest with your sales team about, hey, this is who we're looking for in a customer. This is what we're looking for in performance. This is, what, the type of culture that we're looking to build here. And so I think that level of honesty and transparency is, very much a theme of the things we talked about today and ties it all together. And Pete, thanks so much for being on the episode. To all our listeners out there, if you enjoyed this interview and this episode, you can find more of our content at yardstick.team. And if you have any feedback for us, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today.